The 12th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Nobody wants you.
Nothing.
Worthless. I hate you.
I was born in prison 2 months after my father was murdered.
I understand you like to fight.
It's the only way some people learn. Send me to the brig.
Here's the brig right there. Lock yourself up. You looking for a discharge, Fisher? That's where you're headed.
What's up? Where you been?
Me?
Yeah, you.
I gotta get back to the ship.
Running away how you handle your problems?
The good Dr. Davenport, he may have all the answers to all your problems and all your questions. Ain't that right?
You are addressing a superior officer. You understand me? Do you understand me?
Well, what do I do? Because I don't know what to do.
You need to find your own family.
Why do I have to forgive?
To free yourself, so that you can get on with your life.
My mother left me. My father.
I understand.
Nobody's taking anything else away from me no more. I think you're beautiful.
Thank you.
You never know, son. These things, sometimes they can escalate.
People grow. People move on. You've grown. It's time for you to move on.
I'm still standing. I'm still strong.
Heavenly Father, thank you for our friends. We also pray for peace in the world and in our lives.
Now in his 40s, the story of Antwon Fisher has inspired and given hope to countless Americans. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, child abuse and neglect. Here to tell us more about that are Dr. Deborah Anderson, Director of Training for Project Harmony in Omaha, Jean Klein, Executive Director for Project Harmony, and Mark Zimmer, Director for the Northeast Child Advocacy Center in Norfolk. Thank you all so much for joining us and welcome to the program. Deb, let's start with you. If you could give us the definition for child abuse and neglect.
You know, one of the things that's really interesting about defining it is that there is no federal definition of child abuse and neglect, so every state defines it a little bit differently. But we summarize it just in talking about 4 different types. That there's physical abuse, there's neglect, there's sexual abuse, and there's emotional abuse. And they're the 4 most common types of abuse or neglect that you would see.
And how prevalent from where you sit is this in Nebraska?
Well, Nebraska's statistics will show that the most common type of abuse we're going to see is neglect. And what that means for us is that about 80% of all maltreatment in our state is neglect, followed by physical abuse, then sexual abuse, then emotional abuse.
Okay.
So we have a very high rate of neglect in our state. But usually what you'll see is a combination. So a child might be neglected and physically abused, or emotionally abused and physically abused, or sexually abused and physically abused.
And Jean, Antwon Fisher, obviously one of countless victims to all of this. We do have his picture up here now. Tell us about his story.
Well, he is still a young man in his 40s now who grew up in the system. He was born in prison. His mother gave birth at the age of 17 to him in prison, and he was placed with, I believe, some caring families initially for his first 2 years, and then he was passed around through the foster care system until he was 16 or 17 years of age. During that time, he endured severe physical and sexual abuse. The movie does a great job of portraying that abuse from a child's perspective. He found himself on the streets when he was a teenager. homeless, and witnessed some of the worst things a kid would ever witness during that time. Found himself at a recruiting station for the Navy at the age of 18, and out of desperation and nowhere to turn, joined the Navy. And he would say that it saved his life. He was forced to get into counseling in the Navy. He got into some trouble emotionally with his peers in the Navy, and was referred to a psychiatrist. Denzel Washington directs the movie, the Antwon Fisher story, and plays his therapist in the movie. And so through his counseling, he goes back and works through the abuse that he endured, and stayed in the Navy for 11 years and left the Navy and decided to write his story, and through really good fortune, connected with Denzel Washington, and they made it into a movie a couple of years ago.
I want to go back to something you said early on in your response here.
Sure.
That kind of caught my attention, and that was the first few places that he was actually placed were pretty good.
Yeah.
What happens when a child is placed in the system, and if his circumstances were okay, why then the moves? Why did he continue to be?
You know, there was, I think, confusion about where he was going to go. Was his mom going to get out of prison? Could he go back home with his mom? Which is typical in child welfare situations. So, you know, kids, the plan may change. Are they going to? Is the parent capable of caring for this child? In his situation, after a couple of years, she was not, and never did come back into his life in a significant way. So fortunately for him, he was able to get some connections to healthy people, and I think that's why he's still alive today, is because of those relationships that he did have. He talks about in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade having a strong connection to a school teacher who actually was the same teacher all 3 years. And again, another healthy relationship, someone that he connected to and was able to get some strength from, was in his life. Unfortunately, though, he would say that his abuse was too powerful for him to tell people what was actually going on, and it was too severe. And he would say his abuser, his foster mom, had more power than his teacher did, and so didn't feel comfortable or strong enough to come forward with all that was happening in his home.
Well, unfortunately, he did get to a place because of all the help that he received where he was able to effectively share that story. Why, from where you sit, is that so important?
Well, he puts a face to this. You know, we think of abuse, especially child abuse, as happening in some other communities. It's not in our neighborhood, it's not in our families, but in fact, the statistics would show that one in 3 girls will be abused before the age of 18. 1 in 5 boys will be abused before he's 18. And cancer, child abuse is 10 times the rate of cancer. So that's the perspective that we're dealing with on a daily basis here, not only in the Omaha, but across the state of Nebraska.
Pretty overwhelming, obviously, on so many different levels. What are we doing as a state overall to respond to those people like Antwon Fisher?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're a part of are child advocacy centers in the state of Nebraska. These were established, Project Harmony, for example, started in 1996 to improve how the child abuse investigations were managed. In the past, a child might disclose to their teacher that they had been abused. Maybe a police detective or a uniform officer would go to the school, interview the child at the school. Maybe they would be taken to the police station. And it wasn't uncommon for a child to be interviewed 8, 10, 15 times by different professionals. And the result was, one, it was a poor investigation. It generally didn't lead to good prosecutions when there was evidence of that. And more important, I think, in our minds, were that the kids were being re-traumatized. If you could imagine telling some of the most intimate, scary moments of your life to 10 or 15 different professionals, that is a very traumatic thing for kids, to not only have been abused, but then to have to recount that over and over again to different professionals. So today, there are across the state of Nebraska centers like Project Harmony, like the Northeast Nebraska Child Advocacy Center in Norfolk, where kids are brought to one location where they can have an interview, by a professional who knows how to talk to kids. It's video recorded and watched live by the professionals that are involved to investigate those crimes. So Child Protective Service, state employees, the local law enforcement, whether that's state patrol, city police, or county sheriff, they're a part of that investigation, watching that interview as it's going on. If the child needs a medical exam, we can provide for a physical exam of that child. So if there's been a sexual assault, we can do a rape kit on the spot or at the time to determine if there's any DNA evidence. Are there STDs that are a result of the sexual abuse that's been going on?
And Mark, you play a very key role in all of this in Norfolk. Talk to us about, Gene's done a great job of painting a picture for us. What are you seeing specifically where you are? First of all, kind of paint a picture of where you are, and then talk about the day-to-day.
Well, Kathy, we come from more of a rural setting, of course, which is different than Omaha. We don't have near the resources. So this concept of a child advocacy center in Norfolk makes just as much sense as it does in Omaha, because we have a one-stop shop. We have professionalized, trained professionals that can handle these types of investigations. We don't any longer have to train 40, 50 people in the rural areas to do these types of cases. They can come to one shop and get those services provided for them, which saves, economically it saves a lot of money for these small police departments and sheriff's departments, and it provides them with just as good a services as they do in Omaha or Lincoln. So it's definitely a benefit to us in the rural areas. The abuse and the neglect, it's the same. I can't say we could differentiate from rural to urban. Unfortunately, it's all there. So we have to be able to provide those professional services just as they do in the cities. So, and I think we do a really good job of that.
I'm glad you point that out, because I think oftentimes we do get caught up in the bigger cities and all the resources that are so available to us that I don't think we forget about rural, but we don't think of it in the same way. So I appreciate you making that connection and letting us all know that it happens everywhere, regardless of the size of town or whatever the case may be. How many kids are you serving where you are?
We usually average around 300 kids a year, and that's significant. We cover a 20-county area with a population base a little over 200,000 people. I think it's estimated we have about 12% of Nebraska's children in those 20 counties. So for 300 cases a year, and I think we're going to continue to grow those numbers. We've only been in existence for 4 years, so we're a relatively new center. So we're still building those relationships, showing what type of professional quality service we can provide to children and to law enforcement, because in the rural areas they're very protective of their investigations, and I think they're becoming very trusting of us, and with that just grows a better investigation, a joint investigation that I think only benefits the children.
Okay, and Mark, if you could do us a favor for those people who are watching, I know that there are advocacy centers across the state. Could you please let us know where those are located?
You bet. We have currently 8 child advocacy centers across the state of Nebraska. Of course, we have Omaha, Project Harmony. We have one located in Lincoln. We have Norfolk Center. We have Valentine. We have Kearney, Grand Island, and Scotts Bluff, and also North Platte are where the 8 locations are at.
What I would like to do, and thank you, is walk folks through this whole process. And Deb, I'll have you do this, where, you had mentioned earlier that neglect is obviously one of the bigger forms that we're seeing. Tell us from kind of the beginning, how does all of this work? Someone places a phone call because maybe they suspect that something is going on. Take the ball. Tell us what happens at that point.
Generally what happens is calls that come from teachers, because they spend the most time with children and children trust their teachers. So we really see teachers, educational professionals as our collaborators. We really rely upon them to let us know if children are being abused. So they would make a call usually to the child abuse hotline, which is 1-800-652-1999. It's a statewide hotline, and they would report that abuse or neglect. They could also call 911. So there's 2 different ways that you can make a report. So 911, the police officer will go out right away, or if they call the hotline, then a CPS, Child Protective Service worker, will make a decision about whether to report or whether to investigate that abuse or neglect. The child then is brought to Project Harmony by a police officer, or to the Northeast Child Advocacy Center, or to one of the other child advocacy centers. And that's where they would get a forensic interview that's videotaped, as Jean was talking about. And as it's being videotaped, law enforcement and Child Protective Services are watching that videotape as it's happening. We don't do those interviews unless they're being observed by the professionals, because that means that the child doesn't have to be re-interviewed. They're seeing it happen when it happens. And then if it's decided that that child needs a medical exam, we have medical staff available, and we have exam rooms, as most of the child advocacy centers do, and they'll do an exam immediately. So the child doesn't have to leave and be taken to the hospital. It happens right then. So the whole process happens in one place, as you called it, a one-stop shop, Mark. That's really what we want to see happen, is for the children to come to one place, have it all happen at that time. If there's a parent who's a protecting parent, sometimes parents don't know that their child is being abused. So if we have a protective parent, and most of the time we do, that parent is able to come to the Child Advocacy Center as well. And they're oftentimes traumatized by what's happened to their child. They may be finding out for the first time that their child's been sexually abused, for example. So we have advocates who are able to provide support and referrals to counseling for the parents that need that. So we do it all in one place.
Okay. Earlier in the program, you mentioned the various types. What I would ask you to do is reiterate those types.
Okay.
And then for those who are in a position where they suspect, or they just want to be more aware of what's going on, will you give us some red flags that would be associated with each of those forms?
Well, the most common is neglect. So there's two ways to know whether or not abuse is happening to a child. One is to observe it, and the other is the child's going to tell you. Most kids are not going to tell you immediately. They may tell you they were sexually abused a year ago. You know, it happened a year ago, or 10 years ago. They don't usually tell you immediately after it happened. Kids who are being neglected, which we've established as the most common type, they don't know that they're being neglected. They just think this is what life is. I get up in the morning and I may not have enough to eat, and I may not have the right kind of bed, but I don't know that everybody I'm around, they live the same way that I do, so how do I know? So it isn't like they're going to come to school and say to the teacher, my mom and dad aren't feeding me enough. They're just not going to know that. So it's very important that we understand what the signs and symptoms are of abuse and neglect, so that we're able to, as adults, recognize when it's happening and know how to talk to children. What you'll see, though, that makes it difficult for people is kids who have low self-esteem, which all types of abuse and neglect will affect kids that way. They're going to act out in different ways. Some kids will get depressed and withdrawn. Some kids are going to act out. They're going to have all sorts of problems getting along with other children. They're going to have problems in school. They're going to get into fights a lot. Some kids are going to be the quiet ones in the corner that you don't even know they're there because they're so quiet. So kids act out in different ways. So knowing what is normal is one of the reasons why we all need to know what normal child development is, so that we can recognize when it's not normal. Then we know we need to intervene.
Okay. And Jean, talk to us a little bit about the intervention. We live in a society that, has this mindset of I don't want to become involved. That I'm fearful of that. I don't know what the repercussions are going to be.
Absolutely.
So if we are, and thank you for walking us through the red flags, if we are seeing that and we want to act upon it, and this is a child we're talking about, what is the best approach?
Well, I think the first we need to understand that we are all required, or we're all mandatory reporters of abuse or neglect. So we don't, in some states they just carve out certain disciplines that are mandatory reporters when you suspect a child's being abused. All citizens of Nebraska are mandated reporters. So if you suspect it, the expectation is that you report it. Although a very small percent actually do when they suspect it. There's been a lot of research that has been out there. I think it varies from 10 to 15% of the people, when they actually see abuse, only 10 to 15% will report it. Because we're afraid of the ramifications. They don't want to put a child or a family in a situation. We're afraid of the authorities, that they're going to overreact. What we encourage people is, if you suspect it, you need to report it, either by calling 911 or by calling the Child Abuse Hotline, 1-800-652-1999. because you don't know the whole story. You might see that these kids are being home alone, left unsupervised for long periods of time, but you might be the 5th or 6th caller with that very same family. So the Child Abuse Hotline has that backup information and would know, or have there been other reports that may be enough to involve the state in an investigation of child abuse. So we suggest to people, if you suspect it, you need to report it.
Mark, give us an example of something that people may see or be aware of that they may think, that's kind of boring. I don't know whether I should report something like that or not. Do you see or hear about things that are pretty common in that realm that you can talk to the people watching to say, that's something that most people maybe wouldn't think of as suspected abuse or whatever the case may be, but it really is, and you really should step forward. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, Kathy, I think, and I think Deb described it best. Our teachers, the classroom is the best place to see these changes in these children, and I think that's what we're looking for is inconsistencies in behaviors and patterns. Maybe they have more sexualized play, than most people, or they're coming and they're disheveled, they're unclean. Those are just some common sense things that you see. I've heard of cases where the teachers are actually bathing the kids at school or cleaning them up. And we're not reporting those types of things. So these are common things that usually, if we're having like a dirty house or a dirty child, there's more that's tied to that. It just doesn't end there. So I think a lot of times we're, as lay people, we just kind of think about the dirty child. I don't think we see what could be linked to that. That's not the only thing in that household if that's what's going on. So I think that's the big picture. Leave it up to Health and Human Services to decide if they're going to investigate. Just make that call. They'll document it, and if there's 10 more calls just like that or with different things, then they'll make a decision to go out on it. So, but without that information, I think a lot of us will just bury our head in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist. So if we're all doing that, if like Gene says it's 10 to 15%, which I think is probably high, we're missing out on a lot.
And that was really the message from Antwon Fisher, was people were indifferent to his situation. He didn't think that people cared or that they were taking any steps to ask questions. In fact, he really challenged us in this business to ask the tough questions. Don't be afraid to say, what's going on in this home? Are you safe here? In his experience, he didn't get that from social workers or from the people that cared for him. So he really put a challenge out there and said, you need to be asking the tough questions, and challenge the community. Don't be indifferent to this. This is a serious issue. There are kids' lives at stake, and we as a community, we as a state need to step up and make sure we're protecting our kids.
What do you do, Gene, in those instances where you might have, say for example, a teenager who or I suppose any age, but as the kids get older, they are just defiant. They don't want the help. They don't think they need the help. You know that there's something that you can be doing for that child. How do you break through?
Well, again, I think you have to go back to those connections that they do have. Is it a teacher who is connected to that child, and really rely on those people to engage that child or to get that kid to talk. Teenage years are very difficult. Actually, all years, all developmental life cycles, there's no easy time in parenting. But the teenage years tend to be the most frustrating for parents. We see more physical abuse of teenagers. The neglect tends to be the younger children. Sexual abuse is all across the board, young and older kids. But the physical abuse is more common with the teenagers because they're rebellious then, and parents are frustrated and might strike back at the kids.
In the final minutes that we have left, the work that you all do is so very important, and I guess I would like to know, Deb, why did you get involved in all of this, and why do you stay?
I think we heard a lot of our award winners say this yesterday. When you have children of your own, it really makes a difference. You want to make a difference for other children. So some of it is being a mom and being a grandma. So I really want to do more for children. Project Harmony, what we do there and what the Child Advocacy Centers do across our state, we are so collaborative by bringing together law enforcement, child protective services, and our staff that I don't think there's a better way to do our work than the way we do it, which is we bring all of those that are involved that can make a difference in kids' lives in one place at one time to serve children.
Very well put. Gene, what about you?
Well, I would kind of echo some of that. Being a parent, you know, your radar is up for kids and looking out for kids, so that would be the number one. And this, I think this model of child advocacy centers and what we do at Project Harmony is a model that works. It's an efficient model. We make sure kids are taken care of. It's a great collaboration of state government, city government, county government, and a nonprofit agency where we can involve the community. I can't think of a more important cause to be involved in than protecting kids. And the community, fortunately, has bought into this model across the state. So you know, we're very fortunate at Project Harmony to have great support from the community, but all the child advocacy centers across the state are seeing the community come behind them and support the work in protecting kids.
Mark, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, you know, I'm a former law enforcement officer, and then I went into child protection and worked for Health and Human Services. So the reason I got into it, I saw how these agencies weren't working together. And so when we had the opportunity to create and develop our own child advocacy center in Norfolk, because we had to go across state lines at that time, just 4 years ago, to receive these services, I thought this is the perfect opportunity to start building these collaborations and partnerships, and seeing the success that Project Harmony and other CACs across the state have had. We just had to have that in our backyard, and it's been a godsend to our community, not only, you know, to the children, but our community as a whole.
Okay, and as with every program, we do have resource information available. You've been talking about this hotline throughout the program, and we have been able to put that up, and we're going to put it up again. To make a report, we suggest that you call the Nebraska Child Abuse Hotline, and that number again is 800-652-1999. And we do have one more. Project Harmony, 595-1326. They do have a website, projectharmony.org. And then finally, the Nebraska Alliance of Child Advocacy Centers. That is nebraskacacs.com. Lots of good, valuable information. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate the work you do. Thanks to all of you for watching. We will see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at untv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 12th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.